Church. First, giving honor to God, to Pastor Black, and to the deacons and to the ministers here this evening. We'll be carrying our Bible study over to Habakkuk. We're beginning here with the first book of Habakkuk here, opening up, and of course continuing into number 2 next week. So we'll go ahead and read through it, and then we'll be able to see what everything has come up here. And let's see. And we also going in through just to the understanding of Habakkuk and the study of it. We begin here. He was number 8 of the 12 for the minor prophets that we have here in our Testament for our Old Testament reading. And his name so fittingly comes in through the one whom embraces, or the one who clings. And when we get to the back of Habakkuk, it'll kind of make sense on his naming here. And we'll go ahead and read it, beginning with number 1. The burden, verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and they are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slack, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Behold ye among the heathen in regard, and wonder marvelously for our work in your days, which ye will not believe. Though it be told to you, for lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. Yeah. They are terrible and dreadful, their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from afar. They shall fly as the eagle that hastes to eat. They shall come on for violence, their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Mm-hmm. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them from judgment. And Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he, and maketh men as fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. Yet they take up all of them with the angle, they catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice unto their net and burn incense unto their drag, because by them their portion is fat and their meat is plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? Now what we have here is we have the prophet Habakkuk, and what he is doing is we are catching a piece of a conversation. If you will, it's between him and God, and then after he deals between him and God, he speaks between man and God, because that's a prophet's job. They're intercessory. They carry messages between the two. So we have here in number 1, He says the book itself is a burden which he saw. So when he says that the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see, this was a vision that Habakkuk saw. This was a vision. This was an oracle of God. This is what he was showing him. And he says he was assured truth of it as he had seen it with his bodily eyes, already accomplished. So basically he was seeing this vision, or he was seeing this as clear as day. He could see this with his fleshly eyes as if this was already accomplished, because we know everything that we just read beforehand on the destruction that was coming into the land of Judah. So we know what was happening here. So the prophet sadly laments, and we know, just like the book of Lamentations, it's to lament is harder than crying. It's a period of depression. It's something when you go stronger than a crying or a woeful, you are lamenting. So he says the prophet sadly laments of the iniquity of times. The land was full of violence and of as the old world was. So the prophet cries out because of the violence and the iniquity and the grievance and the spoil of this violence that had happened. And then further down, he then complains that the wicked does compass the righteous, meaning all of these that were coming in about are now overtaking and surpassing the righteous man. Well, we know the reason why this has happened. We know what happened. This is because this is what they were designed to do. This is what they were made to do, was to come in and to overwhelm. So God was basically using them as his strong arm of justice, if you will. And it says the kingdom was broken into parties, and they were continually devouring and biting at one another. That's why it says there are that rise up strife and contention, and they sow discord among the brethren. So everything that they were doing against one another was just driving up the contention, which was making trouble between one another. And it says that then because of this, because of the discord that had happened, because of their strife and their contention, this is what happens through, or their justice or their government that happens. So because of the discord that ran among the brethren, because it ran so strongly as to bid defiance to the laws and the administrations of justice, therefore their law was slacked, and is silent, and his pulse beats not, and judgment does not go forth. So because of all of the turmoil that was happening, because of everything that was going on here, what we see here is basically it's showing that the kingdom was divided against itself. And not only was it divided against itself, but it shows it also there was no administration of justice. There was no heed, or there was no ordinance to the laws that were established here. And then that's why they said, therefore the law is slack, because there was no one to carry out the law. There was no one to carry out the justice. There was no one there to carry out the judgment. That's why it said that the judgment goes not forth. So therefore there was no judgment to anything that was happening. Anything was all go basic. So the prophet says, Lord says, why dost thou show me this iniquity? He said, God seems basically, he seems to connive at the wickedness of the wicked, and to have countenance by the suffering of them that profit, or that prosper in the wickedness, or in the shock of their faith of good men. Basically, he's saying that everything that was happening, he was asking God, why are you showing me this iniquity? Why are you showing me them suffering? And why is it that it seems like you're conniving, it's in secret, or that you are okay with this to be happening to the people that are now suffering from the hands of the Chaldeans? So it says that it shocks the faith of good men to see that the wicked, or the wickedness of the wicked, go basically with the approval of God, if you will.
All right.
So then, yes, sir.
So let's see if we can talk that may help you bring this in the 21st century. You know, we're kind of here now.
Right.
You know, we're kind of here to cope. You know, Habakkuk is asking God, you know, why are you going to put all this damnation on us good folk, along with the bad folk? You know, we want to know why out of the half million people that are dying, there were a lot of Christian folk that died.
Right,
The
right.
first bunch of folk that died were priests. Y'all remember back in the day, when churches went on, there was a whole bunch of prominent pastors and stuff who was talking all that noise about, you know, I don't know, well, you know how they serve it.
Right.
But really, in this, for me, in this Habakkuk chapter, Habakkuk is saying, God, you know, wait a minute, you know, we all bad.
Right.
And you're gonna let them bad folks, we do. You gonna let them bad Babylonians come do this to us?
Right.
And are we saying today, Lord, you gonna let this corona get us? You know, that's a whole bunch of folks.
Everybody ain't bad. Right.
Yeah, you
Right.
just let that go down and all them bad folks.
Right. And just leaving bodies everywhere.
God didn't do it that way.
Right. And that's exactly how that does come into this land, because, or into this time, because that's exactly how they were carried into captivity in that same exact way. It seems like the entire, not even just the United States, but the entire world is under captivity to coronavirus.
Yeah.
So that's exactly that same thing in here. So if we look at number 5, he says, behold you among the heathen and have regard. He says, since they will not be brought into repentance by the long suffering of God, he will inflict upon them. So then we have an amazing punishment so strange that it shall not be credited by even those that were eyewitnesses of it when it comes. He says, you will not believe it, though it be told to you. He says, a speeding punishment. He says, I will work a work in your days. Now quickly, this generation shall not pass till the judgment threatened be accomplished.
All right.
You can't get away from that till that last judgment that we heard, that last thing that we heard and that we saw and everything that was going to happen. He said, this generation. Yeah, exactly that. He said, this generation is not going to be able to pass by. They won't die without this threat being accomplished. So they're going to see it. He said, I'm a man. He said, I'm not a man of my word, but I'm a God of my word. He said, and he's bringing it to pass exactly what we had. He said, it shall be a punishment in which the hand of God, he said, it will be a punishment so bad in which the hand of God shall appear that this is the Lord's doing. This is a punishment so bad, so fierce, that when the people that are able to behold it, to have eyewitness to this, they're going to say that this punishment was so fierce that this was nothing but the hand of God that brought upon this destruction.
All right.
That's tough.
That's tough.
That is extremely tough. He said, the sentence itself is a dreadful and particular. Lo, I will raise up the Chaldeans. When God's professing people quarrel amongst themselves, this part right here has caught me in my study because of how certain things happen. But watch this then. He said, when God's professing people quarrel among themselves and snarl and devour one another, it is just with God to bring the common enemy upon them.
All right.
Did you hear that?
Amen.
This is the reason why he's allowing this to happen, is because they have been in discord with one another for so long.
Church folk can't get along.
Man, don't that sound about church focus?
Yeah, we talked about this late December.
And this is just what he's watched. This is just what he has allowed to happen all of this time. And it says, the people that shall be raised up against Israel to be a scourge to them are a bitter and hasty nation, cruel and fierce. They show no mercy and they spare no pains. They are a terrible and dreadful fame, for their troops they bring into the fields. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than the evening wolves. That's a description that only the mind can imagine of how quick and how nasty this has to be, because this again is his interpretation, his vision, or his dream. And the reason why the writer uses the evening wolves is because when you have evening wolves, you were 9 times out of 10, if you saw them, They saw you a long time ago, and you are more than likely on the list for dinner. Because it's not that this is in the reading, and then of course watching like the National Geographic and things like that. Whenever you caught them in the evening, they were out on the hunt. Mm-hmm. So this is the evening wolves that seems to, in this time frame, it says, was the most ravenous of wolves, because they were out looking to get that evening meal. And this is the description that he gives us. And then over to 20, he says, the horsemen shall spread themselves a great way, for they shall come from afar, from all parts of their own country. Their own will is a law to them, and they will not be governed, or they will not be ruled or governed by any laws of humanity. So these are the horsemen. These are those that we saw with the description gave us of the chariots and the wheels, right, and the spears and all of this stuff. These are those that are coming through. So now they're giving us the description of them. They said that they are not under any government, they're not under any rule. They are going to basically do what they see fit. Their own will and their own pride is what drives them, and is what's directing them. It says their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. That means that their appetite, their passion shall rule them, and they have no reason and they have no conscience. That means they're not coming to make no reason, no rule. They're not looking for no, let's make a deal. All of that is out. Time's up. Y'all had that a long time ago. Now it's time to taste the steel of this sword. And that's exactly what they're giving the example of. And this is what the vision or the oracle that the prophet Habakkuk had seen. Then it gives it to him. It says that they shall march through the breadth of the earth, the breadth of the city. The Chaldeans' force subdued all the nations in those parts. So they seem to have conquered the whole world. When you see these soldiers or these men coming through, it said the number of them was so great that they took over everything in these parts, that to the common eye that seen them taking over these parts, you would assume that they had taken over the entire world, because of how bad they had taken over all of the parts that were in their local region. And it says that their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and their very countenance shall be so fierce and frightful, so that they shall swallow up all. They shall take a vast number of prisoners and shall send them into Babylon. They shall gather the captivity as the sand and the multitude, and they shall scoff. Meaning, what this was, before we go into that scoff, when he says it shall take up the captivity as the sand for multitude, that means that they have more in captivity than there was sand on the beach. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So just in contrast to that, we do Bible study. Remember when God promised these same people that wherever your feet trod, mm-hmm, I will give you dominion. Mm-hmm. The same folks.
Same ones.
The same folk. And God said, and Israel didn't go as far as they could have gone, because God told them, you go as far wherever your feet go, you will home. But they stopped, because God told them a couple times, told them to do exactly what he's telling the Babylonians to do. He told them, go in there, kill everybody, everything, but they were what? Disobedient. Mm-hmm. And now he's showing them, I got some folks that know how to rob, cheat, steal, kill,
everything.
They're gonna show us what I meant when I say kill everybody.
That's exactly what I mean.
Exactly what I mean.
And then it says when it gets into that scoffing, so basically in the time when I was looking into the study of it, at this time it looks like it would have been Nebuchadnezzar who would have been king at this time frame in the lineage here. And it says that when it says, where did he go? Let me see. in 20, he said, they shall gather up and they shall scoff. Hold on real quick. That's right, King Jehovah. Yeah, and right, because it's, and then it states, it says that the kings and their righteous men shall scoff at their successes. It's in that he shall deride every stronghold, for to him it shall be a week, and he shall heap the dust and take it, a little soil thrown upon the ramparts. So what he's saying here is everything, every kingdom, every dominion, every area, every time frame, he says it's all being overturned and overthrown. Then also into the study of it a little bit, it says, also reading in, it showed that Baal and Nebo were the gods of the Chaldeans. And he says, and he goes in and he says, and they were hardened in their idolatry and their blasphemously argued that because they had conquered Israel, that their gods too were stronger than the gods of Israel. So when they had took that over, because of course, you know, it's not that their gods had given them that victory over them, but because we know that there is no God other than ours. So we know that because of their victory, it was only because of the iniquity that had caused this evil or caused this trouble to come upon them. And then now we have in verses 12 through like 17, this is when he was showing, basically this is God showing him everything. Now this is Habakkuk speaking back into God, and he turns to God and he's saying, he turns to God and he said, with the ease of them at their own mind under the burden that he saw, he said, God is the Lord of our gods and our holy God, and he is Jehovah. Our God is the everlasting God, and if he is from everlasting, he will be to everlasting. Art thou not from old? Art thou not God from old, a God in the covenant with thy people? Art thou not the same God still? Basically, the prophet is referring to the perpetuity of the church from the eternity of God. For Christ has said, because I live, and therefore as long as I live, you shall live. Right. Then he goes in and he says, it was God that gave the Chaldeans their powers. He gave them their commission to take the spoil and to take the prey. Those whom God ordains shall do more than what God has ordained. He has ordained them for judgment and for correction. So this was the whole contempt that he felt when he was reading in that part before, like how is it that the wicked man has now succeeded over the righteous man? Well, it's not so, because God had commissioned them, or God had sent them as correction, and God had ordained them and sent them as judgment. So this is the reason why they have that victory over. This is why they were traveled, and this is why they were taken into Babylon. He said that thou art of pure eyes. Yes, sir.
I did, all was not totally destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
There were those who was righteous that God preserved, but because of the land had got so wicked, and they were not adhering to what the people of God were saying. They were in essence kind of like now they're doing their own thing.
Right.
So they weren't listening to what God would have them to do. So God got better with his people being disobedient. Like they were talking about, they didn't do the gospel, they didn't go where they were supposed to go.
Right.
They went inland instead of killing all the ones that God told them to kill. They thought cohabitation with them. Well, that's what it's been.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't drive them out.
That's
They
right.
drive them out. They said, oh no, that's pretty cool.
Right.
I'm just saying.
So that's exactly what they did.
That's what they did. They don't give up.
Look at it.
Yeah. Her and your house.
Right.
You know, so in here, God got fed up with his people. They were already in captivity.
Right.
And instead of changing or trying to change, He just got satisfied with being in captivity, living among those who were doing all mannerism of abomination. So, in order for God to cleanse the land,
You have to
he
clean it up.
ordained the Chaldeans to come in and destroy. This is the second part of Nineveh.
Right. That's what we covered last week.
I had a question I didn't get to solve in my study. So is this the group? I mean, is this the group before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
If you said, is this the group
Well,
of
see,
people before?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went down. They were part of the captives.
Right.
They went with captives. Now, and you know, they did all the things that they did. I was doing a little study on. Well, we had a Bible lesson last week from a young man on the National Political Conference, and he talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He told us that they were Hebrew boys.
Right.
They were Hebrew men.
Right.
They were disobedient. But what I was asking was, you know, is this before the remedy? You know, who was it? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were remedies. They were carried down.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It would have to be, and then also because and then what I've noticed into a little bit of my study too when I was doing it is that it's a portion of here that still, I would have to say after as well, because it shows a piece in here. And what I've never noticed and never understood is that a part of here, when you read into a little bit further, because I have another one that says who's who in the Bible, right? And when Daniel was put into the lion's den, God sent Habakkuk to feed Daniel.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying.
That brings me all the way in.
So what I'm saying, what I'm asking is, the captivity came,
Right.
And then Daniel and the Hebrew boys, who were very young, they were boys when they were.
Right.
Because
of
they were boys when they were born over.
They were young men when they carried them down.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They were under the age of 2.
They had to be, because and that's why it pulled up even when it goes back into.
That's what the Bible says about it.
Yeah, because you'll connect them and join them in, because when it comes into when it was talking about the kings, it did say it. I saw and I read in two also where it did mention, it said meaning here, like when it goes through, he shall, so it is in its original meaning, Nebuchadnezzar, who is being puffed up with his successes, shall scoff.
Right.
So because he is in, I wouldn't say kingship, but I guess because he was, because he's mentioned at that time, it would come under the time frame of his rule as well.
It's an interesting study.
Yes,
you
sir.
Doing a good job. I'm just,
it had
I've been through this
thoughts
Bible
too.
so many times. You go through it so many times, and every time you read it,
you get something else out of
you
it.
get something else. Somebody
if you're reading it to be edified, that's correct. Yes, sir. All right, then if we move in, we go into 13, and he says, and thou have pure eyes, or thou have pure eyes than to behold evil, because we know this is God. And then in another part, he says it rains on the just as well as the unjust. So this is just saying that he's too righteous to overview or to view the evil. So the mischief done to God's people by their persecutors, though God seems cause to admit it, yet he does not approve it. Into the next verse, wherefore thou lookest upon the Chaldeans that deal treacherously with thy people and givest them success. This is Habakkuk asking, and this is him talking into God directly. Then it goes in and he says, they made no more of the men killing men than of catching fish. The prophet complains that the providence having delivered up to them the weaker to be the prey to the stronger, they were in effect made as the fishes of the sea. So they had been among themselves preying among one another as the greater fishes do upon the least. He says they are given up to the Chaldeans as fish to fishermen. Those proud oppressors make no conscience of killing them more than they do of pulling fish out of the water. They had their various ways of despoiling and destroying as men taking fish. Some they took up with the angle, others they catch in shoals, wholesale in their net, and gather them in their drag. Their enclosing net, their portion is fat, and their meat is plenteous. Now this gives me, I forgot what movie it was I was watching, but this gives me that look of back in them slave movies. Because the reason why, and this is the reason why I say it, is because when they were running or when they was getting away, it was almost just like a drag net. One of them had hooks on the other end. So when they went through the city catching them, and these are the soldiers and pulling them in, it describes the way that they did it, just as if they were fishermen. And just like he says, I want you to cast your net over here on this side. And when he cast their net, they pulled in a bigger drag than they could even pull in, right? So you have that mind frame of them pulling in fish, but instead of it being fish, it's men. So it says some they caught, of course, with the hooks and with snares and things, but then some of them they pulled in with drag nets. I can just imagine, I can see the kids, I can see them running, I can see them trying to hit, getting away, and you just see them throw that cast net that got the weights on the ends, and they go out and they catch them, and it just pulls them back in. Some of them have hooks and prongs in them, pulling them in just to pull in, and it says it gave them the equivalency of fish. So that's the exact mind frame that they had when they were running through here and had that order to destroy and kill everything in here. They were taking back, it said they took back more captives than the sand of the sea. That's a tough illustration to understand. Then it comes in for the 4, he said, shall they therefore empty their net? Shall they empty their nets of what they have caught, that they may cast it into the sea again to catch more? He ends it off on that question that he's going in at number 1, basically, what's going to happen now? How long is this going? How long is this trouble going to last? He said, because pretty much all that they're doing is cast them in their nets and destroying them. He said, how long is this going to happen? He said, are you going to allow them to catch them and be able to release their nets? And then after they release their nets, will they be able to cast their nets out to catch more? He said he's basically coming through like, how long will this punishment last? How long will this injustice last? But this is God's punishment on his people for being disobedient and for doing what they wanted to do and ignoring the people, because just like he stated, this is our read from last week that we have pulling in. This is pretty much that continued on how it happens. So we knew and we saw that they heard the Chaldeans, or they heard these soldiers coming, and they could hear it, just like it said when it told them the rattling of the horses and their chariots and the foot stomp, they march in their footsteps, all of this a numeral number, something that you couldn't even number. And then pretty much when they come in, this is the activity that we have once they have now come in to that great city to destroy of what they didn't want to do. So they're finally basically commissioned to do what God has called them to do. And this is what they are carrying out. That will complete our chapter number 1, and we will come into 2 next week.
Amen.